So they indicted Trump, and here is the district attorney in Fulton calling DA Willis. She's going to tell you what Donald Trump did. He illegally tried to overthrow the election, ladies and gentlemen, with his words. Mm-hmm. Watch this.
The indictment alleges that rather than abide by Georgia's legal process for election challenges, the defendants engaged in a criminal racketeering enterprise to overturn Georgia's presidential election result. Subsequent to the indictment, as is the normal process in Georgia law, the grand jury issued arrest warrants for those who are charged. I am giving the defendants the opportunity to voluntarily surrender no later than noon.
So there used to be an agreement among the political class that you didn't prosecute your political enemies once you got power. And they used to be afraid that Donald Trump was the guy doing this. And now they're doing it. This is the fourth. This is a completely ridiculous, felonious indictment. Of course, you can get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich. We all know that. That's what they did. And they're trying to say that Donald Trump used his words to overthrow an election. You're allowed to do that. The first thing you have to believe is that Donald Trump is lying. So if he believed that there was fraud in the 2020 election, then everything he did is okay. Everything they're accusing him of is based on the fact that he knew it was on the up and up. Donald Trump knew it was a lie that the 2020 election was fraudulent, that was a lie, and he pushed it, and then he pressured electors and other people to flip their votes and find votes for him. Well, if you really think that the election was stolen from you and there was voter fraud, you would think there's lots of more thousands of votes for you out there for people to find. So this is what they're trying to get him on. It's ridiculous. This is the fourth completely, not that they might not convict him. That has nothing to do with whether he should be prosecuted or not. That has nothing to do with it. Whether they're going to convict him or not. There's nothing to any of these cases. They're criminalizing free speech. Well, watch this, Kurt. So, by the way, if Trump had really done what she said, tried to overturn that election illegally, that would have been great, because maybe it would have avoided the Ukraine war, the one that we're paying for. Or maybe if Donald Trump was president and they made him do the Ukraine war, at least people might be a little more skeptical of it. But he didn't. So so let's remember what the Democrats did.
He's got the right attorney general in position to do it. We now know they really have been trying to gin up criminal prosecutions and criminal investigations into the president's perceived enemies.
This is when they thought Trump was doing it to Joe Biden. Now Joe Biden's doing it to Trump. And it sounds like they're describing what Joe Biden and the Justice Department and all these DAs are doing to Donald Trump. Tell me if it doesn't.
He's got the right attorney general in position to do it. We now know they really have been trying to gin up criminal prosecutions and criminal investigations into the president's perceived enemies. Politically motivated persecution, right? Courtesy of Bill Barr. I'll roll in the FBI on you. That's how banana republics work, right?
The home of the 45th president of the United States has been raided by the FBI.
Mr. Trump is using the Justice Department to go after his perceived enemies. I feel worried about the prospect of the Justice Department being used as a tool of this president or any. In our little banana republic, any capable prosecutor can get a grand jury to hand down an indictment of something as innocent as a ham sandwich.
Today, an indictment was unsealed, charging Donald J. Trump.
Breaking news on former President Trump. He's been indicted for the fourth time in 5 months.
Bill Barr, on the president's behalf, is weaponizing the Justice Department to go after the president's enemies. When you win an election, you don't seek to just prosecute the losing side.
The president using the Justice Department as a weapon to get what he wants.
Department of Justice is totally politicized.
Sicking the Department of Justice on political opponents, threatening to imprison his political rival, Banana Republic style.
Trying to exact revenge against all of his enemies, tin pot dictator in a banana republic.
Is acting more like a banana republic dictator.
He's using government resources to go after his political opponent.
Essentially, we are a banana republic, that we are seeking to have a bogus and criminal investigation into a political opponent.
And that's using the Department of Justice to also target Trump's political opponent for nefarious reasons. This is a massive abuse of power and a betrayal of our values.
The President of the United States is targeting a family member of a political opponent. This is a type of thing that happens in a banana republic.
And trying to take out a political rival in Joe Biden.
Criminally investigating an American political rival, someone the president is worried about losing to in the next election.
To investigate my principal opponent or a principal opponent in the upcoming election. Houston, we have a problem.
Don't you think that's something that should be investigated when the incumbent political party opens a counterintelligence investigation on the candidate of the opposing party?
We know Trump is itching to politicize the Justice Department, and the Attorney General has been super shady.
The president is weaponizing the Department of Justice to bring cases against his enemies. The Department of Justice is in an existential crisis.
Again, it's yet another example of the Justice Department basically losing all of its independence in this administration.
This is now about corrupting the next election. And for me, this was crossing the red line.
A president who is actively trying to potentially steal the upcoming election.
But to try to take out a political rival. The end goal being 2020.
Donald Trump and his attorney general are using the Justice Department. The only difference between this and a banana republic is that Trump does not eat fruit.
The 2020 election is really the last chance we have to stop our system from fully sliding into a corrupt banana republic.
Bill Barr has done everything that Donald Trump has wanted him to do. Yeah. We're living in a banana republic right now.
When you start using the Justice Department to go after your enemies, that's very, very dangerous.
Donald Trump is using the Department of Justice to go after his enemies in any way that he can.
Having the head of the chief federal law enforcement agency essentially working on his behalf to investigate a political rival.
To investigate the family of a political opponent. Basically, banana republic behavior.
We're no better than some, some banana republic.
And he's using the abuse of power and every element of the presidency to try to do something to smear me.
We just have to demonstrate that he will not take power. If he does run.
So I appreciate Tom Elliott tweeting that out. But this should really scare you because everything that they were saying on that video is actually happening right now. That's what's happening. We became a banana republic. The establishment wants to criminalize their only person who's going to oppose them. And they would be doing the same thing if Bernie Sanders somehow grabbed power, or if Cornel West was able to grab power, they would be doing the same thing to Cornel West. They would be calling him a criminal. They would be criminalizing his following.
They already called him a spy.
They already called him. They've called him white
Russian
supremacist.
asset.
They call him Russian asset. They already did that. So that's the playbook. And this is the new playbook is the establishment, not only in America, but in other countries, the establishment criminalizes their political opponents and puts them in jail. And that was Democrats. That was 3 minutes straight of Democrats warning you about the thing that they're doing right now. And Donald Trump says a large, complex, detailed, but irrefutable report on the presidential election fraud, which took place in Georgia, is almost complete and will be presented by me at a major news conference at 11 a.m. on Monday of next week in Bedminster, New Jersey. Based on the results of this conclusive report, all charges should be dropped against me and others. There will be a complete exoneration. They never went after those that rigged the election. They only went after those that fought to find the riggers. Now, there's something really uncomfortable about riggers in all caps like that, I got to say. Not as uncomfortable as, say, I don't know, putting a medal on a Nazi at Disney World like the great Jon Stewart did. Here's what Glenn Greenwald has to say about it.
That Donald Trump did exactly that was illegal.
So he's trying to find out, what did Donald Trump do that it's illegal?
We have to prove Trump honestly thought he didn't win. The guy who has probably never in his life
thought he lost anything.
Fault, or
never took responsibility for a failure.
Which you all know and criticize him for. But you think this time
he knew secretly he was a loser.
Inside.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is what Glenn says. What did he do?
That Donald Trump did exactly that was illegal. He definitely sued in court multiple times and lost, which is absolutely his right to do. He
told Mike Pence what he heard from his lawyers was Mike Pence's ability to do, even if it wasn't, which is...
So Trump's lawyers told him that Mike Pence could overturn the election, and so Trump leaned on Mike Pence to exercise what Trump thought his power was, which, again, not illegal.
Act as that vice presidential role and reject as certified results, ones that he regarded had evidence of fraud, and send them back to the states. He arranged for an alternative state of electors to be ready to be anointed in the event he could prove that there was fraud. But what about this is criminal? Which of these steps are illegal? You really have to stretch the law to make it into a crime. I'm not saying it's impossible, but this is what I've been saying from the beginning. If we're going to abandon decades worth of consensus among Washington elites and the political and media class,
the consensus he's talking about is that we're not going to try to criminalize our political opponents. That's the consensus. That once someone gains power, they won't immediately try to throw their political opponents in jail. That's what he means. They didn't put Dick Cheney and George Bush in jail, and they admitted to ordering a torture program. Barack Obama committed war crimes every day of his life. He presided over the drone program, which killed 90% innocent women, children, grandmothers, grandfathers, babies. He was doing that.
Any male with arms and legs over the age of 15?
90% innocent people he
killed. That ain't
killed.
collateral damage.
That's on purpose.
If they got a terrorist, that was collateral.
That was. Okay. So that's the consensus he's talking about, is that even though they're all war criminals, all of them, every president in my lifetime, you don't prosecute your political enemies, and that was the consensus. Well, now this is over because the donor class hates Donald Trump. By the way, Donald Trump was one of them. So this idea that somehow Donald Trump is a horrible liar, criminal, some kind of crazy criminal who needed to be indicted 4 times, he's been in public life for like 70 years. They gave him his own network television show for 10 years straight where Hollywood celebrities would genuflect at his altar, and they weren't even allowed to use his first name. That's how much reverence they had for him, Mr. Trump. They gave him Emmy nominations. Every politician wanted to be seen with him. The Clintons and his kids are best friends. They all go to each other's weddings. They all play golf with each other.
Oprah.
Yeah. So this idea that somehow Donald Trump all of a sudden in his 75th, 6th, or 7th year of life became some kind of unbelievable criminal that they have to prosecute right now, of course, doesn't pass the smell test whatsoever.
You understand the crime here. It's something they all believe in. They'll tell you over and over again. It's called staying in your lane.
That's right.
And so even the great Howard Stern's like, oh, if he said I'm not going to run for president anymore, I would hug him right now.
That's right.
Like, you're supposed to stay. So, for example, don't research anything. That's not your lane.
That's right. You're supposed to let Dr. Fauci look it up for you.
It's called stovepiping in the intelligence community.
That is right. So let's hear what Glenn has to say.
Consensus that I have not shared, that I have rejected, but I only want it abandoned if it's going to be applied legally to equally to everybody. I don't want it to be a one-time only exemption for Trump. I had been arguing since the beginning of writing about politics that the media's fraudulent neutrality or posture of not having opinions or not being subjective was devastating to journalism because everybody knows it's a fraud. And then, of course, sometimes as a journalist, you have to take sides if one side is saying something untrue and the other side is saying something true. The example I always use was the use of torture methods by George Bush and Dick Cheney that had been regarded as torture in every single jurisdiction, including American jurisdictions, for decades. And I don't just mean waterboarding. The torture that was used by the United States as part of the war on terror went way beyond that. All kinds of stress positions, keeping people in cold, depriving them of sleep for days at a time to disorient them. Classic techniques of torture that had been regarded as torture and prosecuted as torture by the American authorities for decades. And then simply because George Bush found a couple of lawyers, neocon lawyers in the Justice Department to say it wasn't torture, the media refused to call it torture on the grounds that they shouldn't take sides. And they would start to call it harsh interrogation techniques because that was the terminology the Bush Justice Department had adopted. And I always was against that. Of course, the media needs to have an allegiance to the truth, and sometimes that does mean you say that one side is wrong and the other side is right. They obviously have abandoned this feigned neutrality. They don't pretend at all to be neutral. It's just their loyalty is not to the truth. It's just to defeating Donald Trump. It's not that they've abandoned this practice of feigning neutrality or being objective to a flaw. It's a one-time only exemption for Donald Trump. Everything has been transformed as a result of Donald Trump. Every profession, every institution that has anything to do with politics has abdicated their role in order to do that. And that's the same here. This does not mean, none of these indictments mean that we're now going to start to have a very wide and permissive interpretation of law to start indicting top-level politicians. If it were, I would look at it differently. I would still only favor prosecution where someone has actually committed clear crimes. You cannot go around charging popular politicians with crimes absent clear criminality, because if you do that, you're going to destroy the credibility of the justice system and of the legal authorities.
And that's what's happening right now. They've destroyed the credibility of the justice system and the legal authority in this country. They did that. That's what's happening. But I say this to Glenn. Well, what's so hard for Glenn to understand, really, right? If we stretch the law to get Trump, then we'll have a permanently gaping loose law that we could then use against you. It's a win-win, really. It's a win-win, really.
We need more gaping laws.
We need more gaping, loosened laws. And let me just show you this. Michael Tracy says, can someone explain to me why it's such a frightening menace to democracy that large numbers of GOP voters think the 2020 election was illegitimate, but supermajorities of Democrats think Russia literally hacked the voting machines in 2016 actually strengthens democracy somehow? And he points to this. So there's a supermajority, 67% of Democrats think that it is probably true or definitely true that Russia tampered with the vote tallies in order to elect Donald Trump. That's the question. Did Russia tamper with vote tallies? 67% of Democrats think they literally flip votes in voting machines.
Well, they called it hacking the election.
Yes.
And I would ask, what do you mean? Did they hack the machines?
They say yes.
Well, the people at the time, they were going, no. I guess they thought he hacked Hillary's emails and that's hacking the election. They weren't saying, like, this is deliberately confusing. So when it's all said and done, it's like crossing state lines.
No, but there were all those. Yeah, there were all those stories that the mainstream media ran that said Russia has cracked into our voting rolls. Remember? I don't know if you remember that. Oh yeah. First it was 17 states voting rolls, and they got there. Then it was 41, and then it turns out that was all a lie. That was all made up by the FBI and was repeated by the mainstream media and the Young Turks and people with MSNBC contracts and all those people.
Yeah, right.
And the Democrats couldn't say it enough that they thought that the voting was rigged.
Continue to think that our voting machines are too vulnerable.
Researchers have repeatedly demonstrated that ballot recording machines and other voting systems are susceptible to tampering.
Even hackers with limited prior knowledge, tools, and resources are able to breach voting machines in a matter of minutes.
In 2018, electronic voting machines in Georgia and Texas deleted votes for certain candidates or switched votes from one candidate to another.
The biggest seller of voting machines is doing something that violates Cybersecurity 101, directing that you install remote access software, which would make a machine like that, a magnet for fraudsters and hackers.
These voting machines can be hacked quite easily.
You could easily hack into them. It makes it seem like all these states are doing different things, but in fact, 3 companies are controlling this.
It is the individual voting machines that pose some of the greatest risk.
There are a lot of states that are dealing with antiquated machines, right, which are vulnerable to being hacked.
Workers were able to easily hack into an electronic vote.
So I can play this. This goes on for about 3 or 4 more hours. And so all of a sudden in 2020, you weren't allowed to say that because Trump. So you're a chump. Most people in America are chumps and dupes to propaganda. And what's crazier is that they don't think they're propagandized. Americans are the most propagandized people. They got you to think the exact opposite. Hillary Clinton couldn't beat Donald Trump, and they made you think that a Russian and Putin somehow flipped votes. so he could become president. And everyone still believes that. 67% of Democrats believe that. That was in 2017. So you're a chump if you believe the narratives. Whatever the narrative is in the news, it's not right. Whether it's Ukraine, whether it's COVID, whether it's Donald Trump's indictments, whatever it is, whether it's Black Lives Matter protests, whatever they're telling you, it's not the truth. Ivermectin, whatever they're telling you, it's not the truth. Hey, there's no early treatments for COVID. Whatever they're telling you, be skeptical of always, because they're lying. Just like they're lying now they're doing exactly what they said Trump was doing. They said Trump was prosecuting and going after, using the government and the prosecution and the Justice Department to go after his political enemies. That's exactly what they're doing to Donald Trump. You know, I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump. I don't support Donald Trump. But people need to realize what they're doing to Donald Trump, they would do to Cornel West or Bernie Sanders or any person outside the donor class that grabs power. That's what they'd be doing. Hey, come see us live on tour. We'll be in Salt Lake City, New York City, Pottstown, Pennsylvania, Stamford, Connecticut, Toledo, Detroit, St. Louis, Tampa, Boca Raton, and Orlando. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all those tickets. See you there.